Hey guys, welcome back to the video of Frosty Explain. This is episode number 7 of this series, and if you are new on this channel, please subscribe, turn on the bell icon if you like this, and if you are new on the series, check it from the first episode. You will find the playlist link in the description. And if we talk about the playlist, there are many different kind of fanfics related to Pokemon in the playlist section. If you have time, please check them out. So we should begin this series is actually based on what if Ash never get a Pikachu, but he get a Dragon-type Pokemon as his starter, which is written here, the Kanto to legendary. So, if he grow it out and evolved it to the final level, he will get a Dragonite, which is absolute monster in the Kanto region. After the legendaries and a mystical. So, let's begin today's episode without any more delay.
As the door opened, Ash saw a man sitting with his back to the door. He had curly, blonde hair from what he saw. As the door completely opened, there was a ring that could be heard from the computer the man faced. He stood up from his seat, a smile forming on his face as he saw Ash near the door. Ash's eyes wandered through the room that had many distinctive features. Some of the technology that he saw wasn't new to him, as he'd already seen those in Professor Oak's lab, but some of them bamboozled him. The different types of clock that hung on the walls, the gears and buttons and the multiple screens around the room was only some of the many electronic devices that hung in the room that Ash would say was triple or even quadruple the size of his own bedroom. He lips parted as he failed to recognize and guess what some of the complex gadgets in the room did. While Ash observed the room, the young man who appeared to be in his early 20s. "Hello," he greeted with a broad smile. "You must be Ash." "Hello," Ash replied politely with a smile. "Yes, I'm Ash Ketchum from Pallet Town." "I'm Bill," the man said and gestured for Ash to come in. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Ash shook off all the surprise that he held due to the amazement he felt because of the sheer multitude of electronics equipment around. He grasped the hand that Bill had offered him. "It's a pleasure to meet you too, Bill. Nash, can you get us some snacks?" Bill glanced at the butler who had stayed put outside the room. Nash nodded. Without uttering a word, he disappeared out of sight, the electronic door shutting on its own once he'd left. Bill turned his attention back to Ash, who'd taken only a couple steps inside the room. He placed a hand on Ash's shoulder. "Have a seat, Ash," he said as he slid a chair that was nearby. "My room can be a bit daunting," he said. He motioned for Ash to have a seat. "Make yourself at home." Ash brought a nervous smile on his features. "Ah, thanks." He was in the presence of one of the most successful scientists not just in Kanto, but all over the world. He couldn't help but be tense. Bill perched himself on the chair that he'd been previously sat on and rolled it closer to Ash. "I see that you've come alone, Ash," he said. "I was told that you and Gary would both come." Ash raised both his eyebrows and sighed. "Yes," he scratched his head edgily. "But Gary was. He had somewhere he had to be, so he said he didn't have the time." "Didn't have the time, eh?" Bill grumbled as he leaned back into his chair, stretching his arms wide. I see. He laughed for a moment and sat back straight. "I had things prepared for the two of you, but I'll hang on to one of them for now." "Things prepared." Ash titled his head to the side. What was it that Bill was talking about? What things? His mind wandered through the possibilities of what it could be. There was a hint of excitement that had built up inside of him. It could be anything similar to the devices present in the room. If it was, he was intrigued. "Nothing special," he mumbled as he turned around and opened the drawer under his shelf. He removed a watch-like device from it, blue in color and bigger than a normal-sized watch. "Here, try it," he said as he offered it to Ash. "It's called an X-transceiver. It's a device that's been recently developed in the Unova region, and my job was to add some finishing touches to it." An X-transceiver. Ash eyed the device with interest. He accepted the X-transceiver and observed it from different angles. He twiddled around with the watch but was careful not to touch the screen. He didn't want to push any buttons on the screen that did anything he didn't want to happen. Is it like a watch? It can be used as a watch, Bill said. He smirked as his eyes lit up. He probably enjoyed Ash's ignorance. But it does a lot more than a watch. It can make calls, it works as a map and a lot more. Ash's eyes widened at the revelation of the many functions of the X-transceiver. Really, it can make calls, he all but shrieked, slack-jawed. Mobile phones were released in the time, but they weren't too prominent for traveling trainers because of the need of signal to make calls through it. They would need to have range, and because of their journeys through the wild, where signal towers weren't installed, Ash thought it would be a waste to carry it around. Most trainers preferred to make calls with the many call booths or Pokémon Center telephones that could be found in any town, and even most villages. Ash wondered what was different about the X-transceiver as compared to a normal mobile phone. But can't all this be done with the help of a mobile phone? Why make a device like this? Bill chuckled at Ash's perception. Indeed, it has the functions that a mobile phone would. But there's something much different about the way X-transceiver makes calls. It doesn't rely on the signal towers like mobile phones do. It has its very own network made specifically for X-transceivers. His face perked up as he leaned forward, eyes glittering like a little kid's who'd shown his new toy to his friends. He seemed to be loving every moment of this explanation to Ash. It may have been because of the sheer interest that Ash showed. That's what makes it different and so much better for trainers like you. While it can't make phone calls from anywhere, I can assure you it will be much more valuable than a normal mobile phones. I see, Ash muttered, still fidgeting with the device as he regarded it even more keenly. It was simple watch-like device, yet the things that Bill told him that the X-transceiver could perform were amazing. He glanced back at Bill. And you're saying I can just have it? Bill's lips parted for a second before he let out a burst of laughter, clasping his hands together. Of course, Ash. He looked at Ash with a lopsided grin. Did you think you'd have to pay for that? It looks really expensive, he mouthed bluntly. And you said it's not even out in the market yet. Bill placed a hand on Ash's shoulder, as if to assure him. If you want to pay me, do it by winning the Indigo League. His blue eyes sharpened the next moment, glaring right into Ash's amber ones. I might not look like it, but I'm very fond of Pokémon battles. Of course, I love science, but if I didn't have all this, I have no doubt that I would have become a Pokémon trainer. Bill certainly had a presence. It wasn't his stature that made it that way. Simply the machines that surrounded this room, and the thought that Bill had a hand in developing a lot of them, some of them all by himself, was no small feat. There probably weren't many who could win a scientific debate with him. Ash scratched his head, a nervous chuckle leaving his lips. As that's so, yes, Bill said quietly. His sharp expression softened and a gentle smile crossed his face. And I'm very interested in watching you in the Indigo League, Ash. Interested in watching me? Ash repeated. He wasn't exactly sure what Bill meant. Yes, he confirmed. And Gary as well as a few more. Your generation has quite a few. You probably don't know this, but I was present in that camp. It was quite spectacular. Naturally, being from Kanto, I wanted to see our kids do well. Win against those from other regions. The shine in Bill's eyes when he talked about Pokémon battling was similar to what Ash noticed in a Pokémon trainer during a battle. He even felt that it wasn't too dissimilar to his own at such times, filled with passion and an urge to be victorious. Ash also knew exactly what Bill was talking about, and whom he was referring to. He himself looked forward to his meetings with them. He didn't utter a word, just intently listening to what Bill said. I enjoyed watching those kids from other regions as well, he grinned. But you young trainers from Kanto are the hope. Even Lance, Kanto's champion, is from Johto. We have always had promising trainers in Kanto, he sighed, nibbling on his lower lip. Ash felt his stomach wobble at the disappointment that he felt in Bill's words. But it's been a while since Kanto's had one dominate the leagues the world over. That's why you want us to do well in the Indigo League. Ash asked, curious. He understood what Bill meant. He didn't think as much about trainers being from a particular region, but he could understand Bill's feelings on the matter, if only a little. Even in the Indigo League, there'll be trainers from other regions. But you're the ones representing Kanto, he said, fingers laced as he leaned forward, absorbed in his speech. Remember, Ash, you're representing Kanto, not just in the Indigo League, but in any Pokémon tournament you participate in. There'll be people behind you who you don't even know. Ash couldn't muster up any words in response. He'd been shocked at the revelation that he would be a representative of the entire Kanto region. Of course, he always knew that there were trainers from other regions participating in the Pokémon League of the Kanto region. He never imagined the people who weren't Pokémon trainers took it so seriously. However, Bill made it clear that there were those that did. The blonde-haired researcher realized that his ranting had gotten to Ash. He shook his head, letting out a chuckle. Don't worry, Ash, he said gently. I'm sure you'll do well. Ash snapped out of his daze as Bill nudged his shoulder. Thanks, he smiled wryly. I can't slack off then. I'm sure a student of Professor Oak won't. Bill rolled his eyes after he'd said that, having experienced being a student of Professor Oak in the past. The professor had mentioned Bill being his student once the last time Ash had talked to him. Anyway, I also want you to try these. He turned around again, this time opening the drawer to the very bottom and picked out some balls. Are those great balls? Ash asked as Bill showed him the balls in both his hands, the ones in his right having a blue top side while the ones in his left were yellowish gold and white. Yes, Bill affirmed. I don't usually make Pokeballs, but I've tried my hand at a few. He revealed 6 balls in his hands. I'm not sure if they're up to the level of the standard grade balls and ultra balls, but they won't be far behind. I can't accept that, Ash denied, shaking his head. He'd gotten enough with the extrants ever as it was. He didn't want to get any more gifts just handed to him. He'd be lying if he'd said that he wasn't interested in them, but he knew better. He frowned. I mean, I know that you want me to do well and all, but I just can't take these. Bill scratched his head and sighed. Just think of these as trial balls, he said, then smirked. You're doing me a favor by using them. In fact, if you give me the result of the use of these balls, it'll tell me how good these balls are, and that would be a huge help for my future Pokeball developments. Ash still remained skeptical, staring at the balls for a few more moments. Eventually, he accepted the offered balls from Bill's hand. I'll take them if you say that. He looked back at Bill, leaning back into his chair. Am I supposed to tell you if I caught a Pokémon using these balls or not? They will work better than normal Pokeballs, Bill began. So, you should try these balls on stronger Pokémon that you encounter. He glanced at the ceiling, and thought of a better example. Say a strong, fully evolved Pokémon. Depending on their strength, you should either use a Great Ball or an Ultra Ball. He shrugged and smiled, scratching his head. I'd have given you more, but I haven't made a lot of these. These are more than enough, Ash chuckled. Moving on, Ash, Bill said, getting Ash's attention once again as the raven-haired trainer eyed him. How many badges do you have? I've got 2 so far, Ash replied plainly. I expected as much, Bill grinned. I assume you're going to challenge the Vermilion City Gym next. Yeah, that's the plan. Bill's grin grew even wider, his gaze fixed at Ash. Most new trainers wouldn't challenge that gym this early in their Pokémon journey. And most new trainers who do, don't even manage to put up a fight. Vermilion City's gym leader is a tough one. Ash did expect the gym leaders to be stronger as he progressed in his journey. Much stronger than Pewter City and Cerulean City, since those two were some of the earliest gyms that most trainers challenged. However, Bill talking up the Vermilion City gym leader wasn't what he'd expected. What did Bill mean? As his thoughts ventured to recall the past instances in which he'd heard about the Vermilion Gym, he remembered that this wasn't the first time he'd heard someone speak so highly about the challenge that its gym leader posed. He recalled once a few months back that Professor Oak had also said something similar. It was when Professor Oak was giving some beginner tips to the trainers who were going to start their journeys soon after. He'd told them to be prepared for the Vermilion City Gym, or challenge the Vermilion Gym after they had received at least 3 or even 4 badges. It wasn't that Ash didn't pay attention to Oak's warning. He'd already decided the order in which he was going to challenge the gym leaders before Oak told them about it. And he wanted to follow that order. The recurrence of the warning from Bill made him reconsider, only for a few short moments though. He sighed, shook his head and smiled at Bill. "I know, Bill. Professor Oak did tell me about it," he said, a confident smirk on his face. "But I've already decided to challenge the Vermilion Gym next. And I will." Bill blinked and then burst out in a chuckle. "That's the perfect answer. I'd have been disappointed had you told me that you were going to go somewhere else after I told you that Lieutenant Surge is no ordinary gym leader." Ash nodded. Lieutenant Governor Surge would prove to be a challenge to him indeed. Professor Oak or Bill wouldn't be wrong. Right then, the sound of the bell rang. Bill pushed a button on his desk and the door opened automatically. It was Nash. With a nod from Bill, Nash entered the room with the wheeled table. He brought the table between Ash and Bill, taking out the tray and revealing everything that he'd brought. There were cookies of different kinds, some chocolate, some filled with milk cream, some chips and 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks, Nash." Bill smiled at his butler. "I'll call you if we need anything." Nash took the cue and strode out of the room right away. He was quite the butler, and he acted differently around Bill. Ash hadn't heard him say a word to Bill after his arrival yet. Bill glanced at Ash and gestured for him to have the snacks as he put some sugar in his coffee. "Eat up, Ash," he said. "You want any extra sugar?" "I'd like a bit." "Yeah," Ash nodded. "I like my coffee sweet." "Just like me." Bill chuckled and added some more sugar to Ash's coffee. He took a sip of his coffee, wowing at the taste. "So Ash, do you mind introducing me to your Pokémon?" Ash sipped into his own coffee, his eyes widening at how good it tasted. He almost missed Bill's request. "You want to see my Pokémon?" Receiving a nod from Bill, he continued, "You want me to show them to you here? Will that be a problem?" Bill queried, sitting back straight in his comfy chair, sipping into his coffee some more. The room was spacious enough for a Snorlax to be in, but that wasn't why Ash was hesitant. He was sure Ignis, Ava and Tia would be perfectly mannered, but he wasn't so confident in Kaiser's ability to be calm. The room was far too expensive and it wouldn't be a pretty sight if Kaiser began to unleash his attacks in there. Various scenarios of Kaiser destroying some of the stuff in the room made him grimace. Bill snapped his finger in front of Ash's face. Even though the trainer hadn't realized it yet, he'd been in thought for a minute already. And neither did he know of the various weird face that he'd made in that time. "You with me, Ash." Bill waved his hand in front of Ash's face. Eventually, Bill had gotten through. "Ah yes, Bill," Ash blurted out. Bill smiled at the confused look on the trainer's face. "Is something wrong with showing me your Pokémon?" Ash shook his head and got hold of the glass of water on the table. He took a couple sips and spoke. I don't think it's safe for your room if I release one of my Pokémon here. Bill blinked in confusion. You mean you've got a wicked Pokémon? His expression completely changed. His eyes grew wider, accompanied by a grin so large that Ash couldn't quite make if this was the same Bill. The researcher unintentionally banged the table lightly and gushed forward. Not exactly wicked, Ash chuckled nervously. He rolled his eyes at the imagination of Kaiser being wicked. It wasn't a good sight. He's just a bit too lively. Sounds like a wonderful Pokémon. Bill's eyes glittered. We can go out to the fields after eating. Ash shrugged. Bill wasn't going to let it go. Not that Ash minded showing his Pokémon to Bill. He only feared what Kaiser could do. Sure, just like that, the duo had a few snacks, all the while Ash asked some questions that he had regarding some of the many gadgets that intrigued him in the room. Bill answered most of those questions in a way that Ash was able to grasp the basic concept of how those things worked. Ash found it interesting, so interesting in fact, that he didn't want to stop talking about it. However, just like him, Bill too was curious to see the Pokémon Ash had caught. After almost an hour of discussion and talk inside Bill's room, the two left the house and walked to the empty fields behind Bill's mansion. It wasn't outside Bill's mansion. It was part of it, and the space was huge. It had a few trees here and there, some flower beds, but otherwise, it was just a massive grassy field. All right, Ash breathed as he unclipped all his Pokeballs. Come out, everyone. As he threw the 4 Pokeballs in the air, his Pokémon materialized and chirped. They thought that it was training time, so they instinctively turned to Ash. Not much later, they realized that there was someone new there. They all looked at the human curiously, but none made a move. Guys, meet Bill. Ash walked over towards Bill's and pointed his hand at the young, blonde researcher. He's a scientist. The 4 looked at Bill for a few moments, and eventually walked over towards him as their trainer told them to. They greeted him with chitters. It's nice to meet you guys, Bill exclaimed. There was excitement in his tone. A Charmander, a Pidgeotto, a Ralts. He eyed the green psychic type before he glanced at Ash. Did you catch this Ralts in the wild? Ash scratched his cheek. Yeah, you can say that. Her name's Tia. Quite a catch in the Kanto region, Bill said. They're hardly seen in Kanto. They're native to Hoenn, but they're not that rare in Sinnoh. They're much rarer in Kanto and Johto though. I was lucky with Tia, Ash admitted. She was injured when I found her, but someone in the woods near Pewter City was taking care of her. I didn't have to fight her for the capture. Bill took in the information of Tia's capture and nodded. His eyebrow twitched as he realized that one Pokémon was missing from the 4 that were present in front of him just now. From the corner of his eye, he could see where the 4th had gone off to. Is that the lively Pokémon you talked about? Bill let out a light laugh. Ash couldn't help but laugh with Bill. Kaiser had greeted Bill just fine, which was an improvement in his behavior in itself. It was unfair to expect Kaiser to shed his habits at once though. The blue serpent had crawled to the comforts of the shade of a tree nearby. Rolled up, it appeared uninterested in meeting this new person that his trainer had introduced him to. Kaiser can be like that. Ash found it difficult to word exactly how to describe his Dratini. He shook his head, arms folded. Kaiser, come here. Kaiser opened one of his eyes after he'd heard the calls of his trainer. He yawned. By now, he'd learned to respect his trainer. He'd come to love Ash. In fact, like an obedient Pokémon, Kaiser lazily crawled over towards where Ash stood and looked up at his trainer, letting out a coo. Bill bent down, his eyes clearly interested in Kaiser. And a Dratini. Where did you find this little boy? He looked up at Ash, twisting his eyebrows playfully. Kaiser is my starter, Ash grinned. He figured Bill would be quite surprised by the revelation. Bill's lips parted in curiosity. Your starter? He glanced at Ignis and then back at Ash. You mean to say Charmander isn't your starter? The conversation between the two humans had also caught the interest of all the Pokémon. They'd been listening intently of what the two discussed. Even Kaiser, although attempting to hide it, had his ears open to the conversation. They did, after all, understand human speech, Tia more than the other three because of her ability to sense emotions, but everyone could make out what the humans talked about. No, I found Ignis, my Charmander, a while after I started my journey, Ash said, bending down and petting Ignis, who held sweetly in response. Do you think I'm lying? Ash's lips curled up in a playful smile. Of course not, Bill said. He chuckled as he waved his hands in front of himself. I just didn't think Professor Oak had a Dratini to give to new trainers. He petted the Pokémon in question. Kaiser wasn't particularly fond of being petted, but he'd decided to control his emotions for the sake of his trainer. He only liked to be treated this way by one human, Ash. Well, it wasn't Professor Oak who gave me Kaiser, Ash stated bluntly. It was Lance. Bill's eyes widened at the revelation that Ash made. He stood up in stupor, harshly but unintentionally shoving Kaiser aside. Lance gave a new trainer a Pokémon. He shrieked, his relaxed posture going out of shape, hands spread and jaw dropped. Ash was quite taken aback by the response. Was it really this big a deal that Lance caught a Pokémon to give to a new trainer? He said he couldn't catch a Charmander that Professor Oak asked him to, Ash said. But he had a Dratini instead. So that was that. A crooked smile made its way to Bill's features. He calmed himself, but not fully. And you believed him? He questioned. Ah yes, Ash answered, lines forming on his forehead. Why would Lance lie? At that point, Bill almost burst out laughing. Almost. He controlled his laughter, a hand making its way to cover his mouth. He turned around, says to not face Ash. He hadn't had to control a laugh like in a long, long time. Ash scratched his head in confusion. Was this how Bill usually reacted? He shoved the thought that Lance would lie to the back of his mind, not doubting his idol's words for even a moment. It took him some seconds, but Bill eventually calmed himself down. This was turning out to be a much ecstatic meeting that he could have ever imagined. He was sure Lance had lied. He was certain. He'd worked as an assistant to Professor Oak for a while in the years gone by, and he knew full well how the Pokémon to be given to new trainers were obtained. Yes, they were transferred to Professor Oak. But Lance never had a hand in that, and he was sure that with the workload of a champion, Lance didn't have any time to work as a Pokémon provider for even the great Professor Oak. Of course, he wouldn't lie. Bill coughed. There's no way our champion would need to lie to give you a Pokémon, he smiled. He had never seen this side of Lance. It was pretty similar to how he'd made Ash accept the X-Transceiver and the Pokeballs earlier. There sure were ways they would go to have their way. Ash sighed. Of course, Lance wouldn't lie. I have to say, Ash, Bill started, his gaze on Ash's Pokémon. You really have got some amazing Pokémon. I'm not much of an expert in judging a Pokémon's strength, but I'm sure you'll turn them into something even better. Ash smiled at the compliment from the researcher. Thanks, he said. Yes, they are amazing. He bent down and caressed Tia's face, who'd clutched onto his leg. The Rolts squealed in delight and nuzzled her face on her trainer's leg. And they love you. Bill laughed as he too began to pet Ava, who closed her eyes and let the human touch her feathers. Bill observed Ava, Ignis and Kaiser one by one, petting them on the head. Ignis and Ava didn't have a problem with it, but Kaiser did. He controlled the urge to launch an attack though. Next, he moved towards Tia, who instinctively hid herself behind Ash when Bill got closer to her. Don't be scared, little Tia, Bill chimed. He tried to bring his hand closer to Tia, but she hid towards Ash's other leg this time. You love your trainer, don't you? Ash bent down and picked Tia in his hands. Don't worry, Tia, he comforted the psychic-type Pokémon, nuzzling his cheek against hers. Bill just wants to be friends. Tia gazed into her trainer's eyes and nodded after a second. Still hesitant, she turned to look at Bill, as Ash placed her body on the ground. She hadn't had close proximity with many humans other than Tasha and then Ash. She didn't have a problem being around humans as long as she was with Ash. Getting too close to them, however, was totally different. Atta girl, Bill cheered as Tia finally let him touch her. The little green Pokémon closed her eyes as he touched her, but after a few moments, she snapped them open. She looked into Bill's eyes and let out a coo. This human wasn't too bad, she could tell. Ash smiled at the sight of Tia getting comfortable and abandoning her fear towards Bill. She'd acted like that on a few occasions before, and he would have been talking to her soon about it. He'd decided to explain how she didn't need to be afraid of humans. Being wary of some was fine, but it appeared as if he wouldn't need to do that. The more she learned on her own, the better it was. The two humans and the 4 Pokémon interacted in the fields for about half an hour before making their way back inside. This time, it wasn't Bill's room. It was the hall of his mansion. Bill had told Ash to not call his Pokémon back inside their Pokéballs. They would be hungry, he'd said. And they were. The way they grubbed the Pokémon food offered by Bill made it clear. Kaiser gulped down the food in a way that even had Ash embarrassed. The other 3 showed much more etiquette in their eating habits. In the time the Pokémon ate, Bill gave Ash a trip of his house. He showed the raven-haired trainer multiple different gadgets and some more things that were in development with him. One thing that caught Ash's interest was one of the new Pokémon training gadgets that Bill was working on. So this can help psychic-type Pokémon train in their minds. Ash asked, observing the purple-colored necklace, which had a shining pink orb in the middle. If it's successfully completed, it will, Bill replied. It was clear he liked the enthusiasm Ash showed towards his devices. It's in the starting stages of its development right now, and it will take some time to complete. Ash rubbed the stone in the middle, as this made from psychic plate. Bill clicked his fingers. Bingo, he said. The psychic plate helps strengthen the psychic abilities. This way, they can make a scenario in their mind. The strength of the psychic plate helps them to retain that without losing focus. If they can do well in their mental battle, it definitely will increase their strength as far as their psychic abilities go. Ash nodded, without uttering a word. The will be made such that their battle doesn't affect their minds. Bill continued his explanation. You see, Ash, there are still ways to strengthen a psychic-type Pokémon's mental energy without using such a device. But that takes very high-level Pokémon and a mastery in psychic energy that only the psychic types of the highest level possess. He nonchalantly rubbed his finger on the stone. And using so much mental power has its side effects. It can take a toll on the user's mind. That's why it's not really safe to do this for even high-level Pokémon. He stressed the last part. I see, Ash said, glancing at Bill and then back at the necklace. So this can change the way psychic-type train. Well, it might, Bill said. It's been in the works for over 3 years now. If we're able to complete it and the Pokémon lead deems it safe, it will definitely have an impact. Bill showed Ash some more of his projects. He absolutely loved explaining it to Ash. And Ash loved every moment of listening to it. Some of the projects in the work could prove so useful in training Pokémon that he almost thought about trying it before being reminded by Bill that most of them are incomplete. Your house is quite fascinating, Ash couldn't help but awe as they finally reached back to where they'd started. Some of those things, he struggled to put it into words, pausing for a few seconds. I couldn't even have imagined some of them even existed. That's the power of science for you, Bill said with a grin. There's almost nothing that science cannot explain. He chose his words carefully when he said that. Ash couldn't really disagree, not after experiencing such amazing stuff. Ash's glance caught the clock. It's already 5 p.m., Ash mumbled before he looked at his Pokémon, who were resting in the corner of the room, and then at Bill. I better get going. We've got plenty of rooms, he said with a grim smile, pointing his hand to the corridor beside him. Stay the night at least. I appreciate the thought, Bill, Ash smiled. But I think I've caused you enough trouble for one time. I'm used to camping out now. You don't need to worry. You won't be able to go much further in a couple of hours anyway, Bill said, putting a hand on Ash's shoulder. You can leave early in the morning, all rested up. He let out a playful chuckle. I've probably tired you out by telling you all that stuff about all my projects. And besides, he smirked followed by a wink. Kids should listen to their elders. Ash rolled his eyes at being called a kid. All right, Bill the elder, he groaned. I guess you're right that I won't get far today. Bill smiled. That doesn't sound too bad, you know. He joked before the two of them burst out in laughter in unison. Ash stood on the gate of Bill's mansion, a smile on his face. Bill too smiled as the two grasped the other's hands in a handshake. After agreeing to stay the night at Bill's house, Ash and Bill had some fun watching some Pokémon League battles videos from last year. Ash had to admit that Bill had quite the collection of Pokémon battles. They watched some of those, Bill telling Ash about what he liked in those battles while Ash analyzed them and tried to make sense of the unusual ways of fighting. He'd watched most of the battles of last year's Indigo League, but at the time, he'd watched it with excitement rather than having an eye out for the strategic aspect of the battles. This time, he was able to make out why certain moves were used the way they were. Now that he was a Pokémon trainer and had trained his very own Pokémon, he understood those aspects much better. It was one thing to battle with Pokémon that you didn't own like he'd done in his younger years, and another to raise his own Pokémon and use the moves he'd taught them in battle. Ash was quite surprised by the amount of knowledge Bill possessed when it came to Pokémon battles and the subtlety of it all. At first, Ash had assumed that Bill would just be a casual fan who loved Pokémon battles. Almost everyone in the entire world watched them, so it would come as no surprise that a researcher would. However, Bill had quite the eye for strategies in the way a move was executed. Ash was quite amazed at how much thought Bill put in his explanation. He had to remind himself that he was in the company of a world-renowned researcher, one who'd achieved more in only a few years than many researchers did in their entire lives. Ash was also able to get a much deeper knowledge of the X-transceiver that Bill had gifted him later that day. When Bill gave it to him, he'd explained the basic features, but this time, he went one step further and explained some of the very best features in detail, and how some of them worked. This is goodbye then, Bill, Ash said, pursing his lips. Bill sighed. I guess it is. I can't tell you how I love the time I had with you. It's not too often that I get visitors here. He rolled his eyes as he glanced at the ground before smiling. Not ones who'd listen to me blabber all day anyway. You'd get a lot more guests if you didn't have your guards, Ash snorted. And I bet a lot of them wouldn't be cool. Bill shook his head in amusement. Indeed, I'm grateful for them working for me in the middle of nowhere. Ash let out a laugh at the antics of Bill. The guy was way more relaxed than he'd expected. He had to admit that he expected Bill to be somewhat arrogant and stuck up. Not everyone achieves as much as he did, and not in the amount of years he did. He was a great guy, one Ash would love to spend more time with. I better get going then, Ash sighed. He did love the time he spent here. I don't wanna give you a chance to tell me to stay another night because it was late. Bill cleared his throat. I will say I wouldn't really mind that, to be honest with you. Ash turned around and glanced at Bill over his shoulder. Thanks for everything, Bill. I'll try my best to get some data for you on the Pokeballs. More importantly, Ash, Bill started. His eyes narrowed as he stressed on the words he spoke. Gimme some great battles to watch. I'll try to make it to the Pokemon League if I can. It was quite some ways away, but Bill seemed excited already. Don't worry about that, Ash confidently gushed. My Pokemon will be much stronger by that time, and I'm sure they'll be able to put on a show for you. Well then, Bill said, shrugging. I'll be looking forward to that. See ya, Bill. Ash spoke those final words as he stood straight and began his march. Goodbye, Bill spoke into the distance as he watched Ash take steps and get away from the mansion, one step at a time. Quite the fascinating guy you are, Ash. Ash yawned as he kept his sleeping backpack inside his backpack. It was just 7 in the morning and he'd been able to keep up with the schedule he'd set thanks to the X-transceiver that he'd received from Bill. It had proved to be a helpful device. He was able to make a list of things he wanted to train his Pokemon in the X-transceiver without having to rely on his memory. It had been 2 days since Ash left Bill's mansion and continued on his way to Vermilion City. He'd trekked quite a bit in those 2 days. His schedule was to get up at 7 in the morning, train, then be on his way, stop for lunch, and then again walk until it was sunset. He didn't really do much training after sunset because of the tiring journey he was in. Instead, he used that time to get to know his Pokemon better, talking to them and having some fun. After packing up his tent in his bag, Ash got the small bowls out of his bag and put some food on each of them. His bag had become rather heavy due to multiple stuff he had to carry now that he had more Pokemon. He was quite lucky that his mother had trimmed up on the things he was going to take at the start of his journey. Your food's ready, guys, Ash called out as he stood. The 4 Pokemon who were talking to one another up until then quickly ran towards their trainer and didn't waste any time in getting to their food. You guys sure are hungry today, Ash smiled as he saw his Pokemon munch all the Pokemon food down. Like always, Kaiser loved his food and preferred to eat it quicker than the others, getting some food over his face in the process. Ash shrugged and sighed. Take it easy, Kaiser. He sat down and wiped Kaiser's face with his handkerchief. Your food's going nowhere. Kaiser let out a hiss in response, letting his trainer wipe his face before going back to one of his favorite tasks. It quite enjoyed the food that Ash always gave him. Yes, it had been the same food over and over again, unless they were in a town or city. But it still tasted amazing to him. Ash beamed at his Pokemon as he perched himself under a tree nearby, showing a wide grin as he saw his Pokemon enjoy their food. He grabbed his own packed food from his backpack. He opened the plastic cover to reveal a burger. That was his go-to food whenever he was on a trip. He walked enough not to get fat eating all these. Right then, something caught Ash's attention. He could feel something close to him. It was behind the tree. He waited a few moments before he acted. As the feeling of this presence got stronger, Ash jumped up, his brows furrowed together. He unconsciously wiped some sweat with his shirt as he took a couple steps backwards. The Pokemon who'd been enjoying their meal a few seconds earlier too had gotten wind of what was happening. They too sensed it. Something was hiding behind the tree where Ash stood. They couldn't make out what it was. Finally, Ash decided to see what it was. He'd run out of patience. He scurried to his left and his eyes widened when the realization came. He recognized the creature. A bipedal yellow creature with a kite-shaped face. Its shoulders and chest were brown and it had a long, yellow tail. An Abra, Ash exclaimed. The cry of surprise from Ash had the Abra spring up. It furrowed its eyes, letting out a cry as it spread its arms wide. Ash covered his ears, a grimace on his face as the sound which Abra emanated reached him. It wasn't just a sound. There was a small psychic current created in the air that flowed around. His Pokémon too grimaced from their positions. As the attack ended, Ash grinned. This was a great chance for him. Abra were rare Pokémon. Their final evolutions were strong and Ash couldn't help but think about the possibilities that the Psy Pokémon could open for him. He had to catch it. He absolutely had to. Kaiser howled as he crawled its way up to behind the tree where Abra was. He opened his mouth wide and launched his attack. The dragon breath just whizzed past Abra's ear. The psychic type took a few steps back, fearful of the foe that it would have to face if it stayed there. As Abra brought its hands together to concentrate psychic energy inside its body, Ash dug his, clenching his fists. A new capture always excited him. Kaiser, Ash shouted urgently, it's gonna use teleport, use dragon breath, quick. Kaiser opened its mouth and charged the required energy. He fired it where Abra had been, but it was too late. Abra had disappeared from its position. The dragon Pokémon quizzically turned his head around to track his foe but failed. Ash gritted his teeth in frustration. He kicked the ground, angry at himself for letting the Abra use teleport. How could he have been so lost in thought that the Abra had enough time to use teleport? He was brought back to his senses when he heard Ignis howl. He looked at where Ignis pointed his fist. It was there. Abra had used teleport, but it had only managed to get to the end of the field to the left of them. It was a clear field. Ash still had a chance to catch it. Ash glanced at where his backpack was. There was no chance it would go anywhere from here. Let's go, guys, he yelled. His grin showed that he'd gotten back the enthusiasm. He wanted that Abra. That Abra's gonna be our new friend. As Ash scurried towards the Abra, his Pokémon followed suit. In a few moments Ash caught up to where the Abra was, and his Pokémon caught up to where he was. His forehead creased at the sight of Abra bringing its hands together again. It was planning another teleport. Ignis, use Ember, he commanded. Kaiser, Aqua Jet. Ash wouldn't normally think of taking on a wild Pokémon in an unfair fight. But here, it hardly mattered. The odds of the Abra escaping again were high. He had to make sure the attacks hit. As long as they did, he was confident he'd be able to capture the Abra. Kaiser gushed ahead, its body gradually being covered in swirling water. Ignis flames too made their way towards Abra. But again, the Abra disappeared before either of the attacks could reach it. Ash clenched his fists. Not again. 2 chances and he wasn't able to catch it. He glanced around to check for any signs of the Abra nearby. He couldn't find it. Chia, can you feel Abra nearby? Chia closed her eyes, emanating a weak psychic energy that traveled in all directions around her. She felt the different trees and some local Pokémon around. However, she couldn't feel any signs of Abra. She opened her eyes, lightly chirping as she looked up at her trainer. Her shoulders slumped. She was disappointed to not have found the Abra. Ash jerked his head back, the bright sunshine finally crawling up to him. He wiped his forehead with his hand. Damn, he cursed under his breath. If only he'd remained calmer and thought about a better strategy to attack, the Abra wouldn't have been able to flee. His excitement had gotten the better of him. He grabbed his hat inside. It was all his fault. The Pokémon beside him appeared to be disappointed as well, their heads hanging, shoulders slumped. Ash grabbed his hat inside. It's all right, guys, he said. He sat on the ground and stroked Tia's head. You guys did your best. Don't worry, we'll find some other great Pokémon. The Pokémon looked up at him and after a moment of hesitancy, they all cheered. As long as their trainer didn't mind, they didn't either. None of them minded a few more Pokémon friends. And
If you like this video, please do one thing, like it, share it with your those friends who love to watch Pokemon or any fanfic of anime which are related to specific genres. So please do that and turn on the bell icon for notification of these any other series which are still ongoing on channel. Thanks.